political corruption which occurs when an office holder or other governmental employee acts in an official capacity for personal gain. Social corruption, on the other hand, is that behavior which allows individuals to profit from the social environment they belong through illegitimate actions while they disintegrate the system they are part of. Corruption constitutes a major challenge for businesses operating or planning to invest in Uganda. It is a major crippling and corroding vice to the social, economic and political development of the nation. The police, the judiciary and procurement are areas where corruption risks are very high and under-the-table cash payments are expected. The core of Uganda's legal anti-corruption framework is the Anti-Corruption Act, the Penal Code, the Inspectorate of Government Act 2002, the Public Finance Management Act 2015, and the Leadership Code Act 2002. The Penal Code provides instruments to deal with various corruption offences, including embezzlement, causing financial loss, abuse of office, and fraud. According to the Business Anti-Corruption Portal, there is a high risk of corruption in Uganda's judicial sector, in part due to political interference. About 1 in 6 companies indicate that the court system is a major constraint to their ability to do business. Companies do not believe the judiciary is sufficiently independent, and bribes and irregular payments in return for favorable judicial decisions are common. Corruption risks are very high in Uganda's public services sector. Corruption remains endemic and is an accepted means of getting by in Uganda. Pursuant to this national crisis, NTV, in conjunction with Kabarole Research and Resources Center, an agency which has invested in the study of this problem in the Kabarole region, brings to you a moral reawakening discussion on this deeply entrenched disease of corruption in Uganda. You're welcome.
And already on our social media platforms, on Twitter and Facebook, there is a litany of responses on a question that we posted there, asking you how we can combat this particular cancer that is really greatly infested in our society. And just about 3 quotes that have been responses sent on Facebook. Then we proceeded directly into the studio discussion. Salongo Wanzala said that eliminate the corruption in chief. Then Gina Scott says, simple and precise, the people themselves to start taking serious every matter of the country. And Bobby Kisembo says, repeal and replace the current leadership, start afresh, and we as Ugandans repent and promise to ourselves that from now on we will be transparent. And straight on to the studio, just in continuation with what you're discussing here, I'll be continually just citing what you're saying. Let me engage my resplendent panelists and very prominent people here, especially Justice Mulyagonja, who is Irene Mulyagonja, who is the Uganda Inspectorate General of Government, IGG. Justice, you're welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, viewers.
And right on my extreme left, I have the gentleman called Muzinduki Patrick, Head of Governance, Policy and Advocacy, Kabarole Research Center. Patrick, you're welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, viewers.
Yes. Now, straight to you, Judge. We have Uganda is now ranked 26th as the most corrupt state in the world among its 180 countries. You are part of the frontline agencies and actors in fighting corruption. Why aren't we defeating corruption in our public governance institutions?
I think we first of all, I would like to thank the Kabarole Research Center for carrying out that study. It presents interesting views of what people think about corruption. But before I go into saying why, or trying to explain why we have not made as much headway as is expected by the Ugandan public, is that we have to look at the context within which we fight corruption. We may have very high expectations of the results of fighting corruption when we are not looking at the context. We fight corruption in a context of, 1, scarcity of resources, poverty, ignorance, limited opportunities because of the environment in which we live. Although we are a rich country, I want to emphasize the fact that Uganda is a rich country. It is endowed with a lot of resources. We have not yet exploited as much as we're supposed to exploit. So we remain with what we have to share amongst us as resources that have been exploited from our country, from the wealth that God put in this country are limited. The numbers of people keep growing, but development is not going at the same pace as our population is growing. Therefore, you find we have limited resources to share amongst themselves, and everybody is scrambling for those resources. So everywhere where you have a scramble for resources, you have those who appear to be stronger than the others triumphing over them and getting more access to those resources than those who are more vulnerable.
Yeah, just a slight lead, rather follow-up question on that, just maybe a minute. Rwanda is ranked actually right now 48th, and I know government of Uganda has a serious distaste of referring to Rwanda's performance in many areas. It's 48th, a country coming from a very devastating ruined record of a war. It's a small country, it's a landlocked country, very distant from the ocean.
I do not think I would like to compare Rwanda and Uganda.
Why?
You cannot compare chalk and cheese.
Okay,
so I think let's not go into that argument because it may become political, and we don't want that.
All right, Patrick, thank you, Justice. You conducted the research, very quite detailed, extensive, though localized in the Kabarore region, and you are one of those agencies or organizations, civil organizations that are doing a tremendous effort in the governance area. So just give us a slight brief on how that research, on what that research discovered.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think, as you have stated, this corruption being a cancer in Uganda, we were concerned. We have all the good laws, we have so many agencies that are fighting corruption, but you basically see a lot of things happening in the communities, a lot of cases of corruption increasing. We are asking ourselves, why? Why is it that people find it very easy to beat and kill a chicken thief, and also meet a pickpocketer on the street and they lynch, but they find it very easy to celebrate, cherish somebody who has embezzled money? They don't find a problem with somebody who has taken a lot of things, who has done shadow work in the communities. When you go to church, you find people who are, for instance, branded to be corrupt, but they are being given front offices, they are being accepted. And we said, okay, what could be the problem? Can we dig deeper? Could it be that the society now is the one, through its values, norms, and way of doing things, that they have basically accepted this? You understand, one of the cases, the minister who was arrested, people came to demonstrate that leave our man. Now, this whole thing was really trying to trigger us. What is this whole thing all about? Now, in the Rwenzori region, including the whole country, look at these cases.
And Rwenzori, we're talking about
Yes, we're talking about
yes.
You see, when you go to a health facility, you find health workers coming late, absenting themselves, others are taking drugs. You get it? But when we are trying to investigate, we are trying to look at the national values, the values of patriotism, the values of justice. Now, a midwife doesn't report to work, a mother dies. A midwife comes late to work, yet they took an oath to deliver quality services. Now, it tells you that in terms of justice, in terms of being patriotic, there is a big problem. Because if that health worker knew that the value of life, they wouldn't expose this mother to die. We also looked at the social network, how people relate, right from the household to a community. You find people have friends, have schoolmates, they are going through the same churches. So there is a whole connection. Now, if somebody in the family engages in acts of corruption, people fear to say he's one of us. They don't want to talk about it. Now, we have seen a number of cases when you look at the agriculture. Inputs are delivered late. In some communities, you find a farmer only needs 500 seedlings, but they receive around 1,000 or 2,000. The rest is left to dry. The question is, why can't people come out and say there is a problem? We have seen cases within the recruitment system where there are ghost workers. You see, somebody sits at home, gets free money when others are looking for jobs. You know, it reminds, when you go to some health facilities, some schools, you find there is a payroll where people are getting money, but no one is coming out to expose it. Now,
so basically it's people, because I think so far both of you are concurrent.
Yes. Now,
that
we did
people-centric problem,
yes,
not
the
necessarily
investigation. And you
yes.
see, whenever we're going to discuss, do you know what happens? That the government is corrupt. The problem is up there. I think the message which we are trying to bring out, that the communities, men, women, youth, everyone in the community has provided a fertile ground. I will give you an example. People who try to cherish good morals, like those who want to resist, they are being hated. They are being isolated. They say, for you will die a poor person. Even on the road, some strict police officers, the traffic officers, the drivers do not like them. They even talk, we shall hit and knock you. And you see, people are struggling. If they have serious cases of robbery, rape, murder and all that, you find people are struggling to influence police, to influence attorney officers, to influence magistrates, to make sure that they try to manipulate. Now, what does it tell you? That, it comes back to the core values. There's a thing in African setting that the charity begins at home. We try to dig deeper within a family setup. Are these core values of being faithful, being transparent, being accountable, valuing justice, being patriotic? How is it that you find in a community people are even vandalizing school items, vandalizing items for the health facility, but they do not bother to expose? Now,
yeah, so Patrick, I get your passion. We want actually to dig deeper into
the whole thing is that when you look at the sanctions and rewards,
for those who are corrupt.
Yes, when there is an action, when there is a community member who has engaged in that behavior, how does the community sanction?
I'm actually going to
you
come
basically
about,
find most of the things which we have here. Of course, the justice will be talking about.
Let's not discuss everything in just one response.
Yes.
So I'm just going to go for a break and I want the justice to help on giving us the picture of the system that we are functioning in, the institutional framework. Is it sufficient enough? Do we need to do a change over it? Are you comfortable with it? And then we'll proceed on. Thanks our viewers for keeping with us. Let's just go for a short break, come back into a more detailed discussion about this phenomenon. Thank you. Thanks our viewers for joining us again. I'm Karagawa Bodwins and we are discussing the scourge of corruption on our nation. And we posted questions on our social media platforms and on Facebook. I see Peter Wananende saying that about the solutions. We need to be accounting, there should be accounting for properties of all civil servants in the whole country without fear and questioning their source of income. Emma Cass says that government should sack all the corrupt officials found guilty, starting from the Uganda National Airlines scandal. And on Twitter, I have Nyimba Legacy. He says that let's remove Okay, Kataha from education, because corruption is now on the syllabus. We need to elect appropriate leaders. The thing is really so simple: change leadership from the top. Justice, Honorable Justice. You can hear the responses, very vehement, very passionate. And you have Uganda's anti-corruption legislative framework, which includes your very institution, IGG, the Penal Code, Public Finance Management, and the Leadership Code. And according to Global Financial Integrity, tax evasion, money laundering, and related corruption are costing Uganda at least about 1 billion shillings a year. Okay? And we're asking ourselves, what really now needs to be systematically and institutionally done as to make sure that we cushion ourselves against the fetters of this perpetuated corruption in the country?
Okay, Uganda has all the legislation that we require to fight corruption, almost all, because we have the Anti-Corruption Act, we have the Penal Code Act, we have the Public Finance Management Act, we have the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Act. We also have the National Audit Act. All those are supposed to ensure accountability in the public sector. Now, what is not happening is enforcement of these laws. The Inspectorate of Government, the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Authority, the Office of the Auditor General, the Uganda Police, all those are enforcers of this legislation that we talk about. But what is not happening, I think, is that the enforcement is not as efficient as we would want it to be. We want to be able to prosecute many more cases than we are prosecuting right now. But when you look at the Inspectorate of Government, we only can prosecute 50 cases a year. The number from the Directorate of Public Prosecution may be slightly higher, but we cannot prosecute all the corrupt because the resources are not sufficient. What else do we do at the Inspectorate of Government? We also look at the assets and incomes of leaders in public offices by collecting declarations, which we are doing in this month of March. We also have what is referred to as the Ombudsman function, that is ensuring proper governance, that is strict adherence to the rule of law, principles of natural justice in public administration. That is supposed to help to make government more efficient, following the laws as they are supposed to, so that you curtail corruption. We believe that corruption is the way it is because of systems of administration that don't work as efficiently as they do. If systems of administration do not work efficiently, you are giving opportunities for the corrupt to exploit those systems. If a system, say in a hospital, is not working well, the administration is not efficient to see that they track the corrupt and have them punished before, or rather they punish maladministration before it becomes corruption. Definitely those officials in the hospital are going to exploit the system and utilize it to earn a higher income than they get. I'm not saying that there's the supposition always that if people in the public sector earned more, they would not be as corrupt as we find them to be. But I think that the problem that we have is deeper than just incomes of people. The problem that we have is access to social services. For instance, let's go to the area of housing in Uganda. How many houses do we have, and what is the population that we have? Are we developing as much housing stock as we require? Definitely we are not, because even when you look at the National Housing and Construction Corporation that is supposed to be building houses, we are hardly building any. So what happens then for a person working in the public sector? They will be looking at getting a house for themselves. And because they are not earning a sufficient income to do so, they will exploit all the loopholes that they are in the public sector management to see that they get the money that they require to build themselves their own house, because we as a public sector are not providing the housing that is required. Look at health. itself. We talked about health centers. My colleague here was talking about health centers and how they are not properly facilitated. If, for instance, if we were to say that let there be hospitals that can provide health services for the majority of Ugandans, people would not have to steal from government to be able to pay fees for their, for their medication in private facilities. Or if we had the medication in the public facilities, people would not have to go to private facilities to be able to access health care. So if a system is not working well, it leaves room for people to exploit it, to be corrupt, so that they can sustain their livelihood in a way that they feel is sufficient or is adequate to keep them alive.
Yeah, and I think that on that note, that's the same kind of area of questioning, whether the politics, the way it's structured, it's actually set up to perpetuate and to entrench corruption itself. According to the 2015 Uganda Parliament report, the country had lost over 24 trillion Uganda shillings due to corruption, and according to World Health Organization, over 25% of medicines are lost to fraud and bribery. According to the 2017 BBC survey on corruption, it lists 10 top corrupt political parties in the world, and NRM is the second most corrupt political party in Uganda. And so we're asking ourselves, is Uganda's politics and public governance system literally too corrupt-centered that it can no longer permit anti-corruption behavior? Do you think our politicians and civil servants are the core reason for a corrupt Uganda? And if that's changed, do we need to have that change?
Yeah, I think right from the beginning, I'm trying to position the civil servants and the politicians in a bigger society. This is a bigger picture. Yeah. And what I'm trying to tell you is a problem about the moral fabric of society. That even the politician has been groomed right from a household to a community. Now, I have seen in some schools, for instance, even kids now are giving out sweets for them to get elected. Now, in other communities, during campaigns, you don't see someone coming out to freely give you a vote based on your performance, but they say, bring something for the throat. But at the same time, look at this. We have a government. NRM manifesto talks about zero tolerance to corruption. Policies are very clear. Laws are very clear. But those civil servants and politicians you are talking about, whom do they deal with? Which society do they live in? Now, they are being treated as celebs. In fact, they are accepted. Whatever they do, where do they take the money? Now, when they get that, that's where you see a lot of people are being bought with sodas. Somebody goes to the village, all the villagers concentrate, connect. Now, they do not connect that.
But Patrick, you see that argument is very challengeable, okay? Yes. You see a politician and people who are in power, yes, they have autonomy over the forces of violence, they have the forces of finance, they literally have the control of society in their palms. That if they determined that this kind of behavior should not be expressed, that would change even the mindset of the people. Because people are so disempowered by the political setup, the political system setup.
Let me ask you,
so you can...
Can you sharpen your own panga to cut you? You see, most times we have been talking about who has the power. Is it about the egg or the chicken? We are saying the government, the institutions, who brings them to power? You are aware about our election cycle, ever after 5 years. But that's why I'm talking about the issue of community sanctions. Have you seen anywhere in our society? I've given an example where chicken thieves are being lynched, beaten by mob justice. Give me an example.
A politician who was lynched.
I'm not promoting them to be lynched. But the question is, I'm trying to bring out a message. If we are talking about rewards and sanctions by a community that's not happy with corruption, what are they doing about it? By the way, look at the 24 trillion we are talking about. Who is taking it? Now, we are looking at...
No, it is lost within the
yes,
custody of politicians. So you cannot bring
and
in
that's,
the person.
And what do they use it
The-
for?
Who votes the
What do
politicians?
they use it for?
Who
Let
brings
us
them to
also,
power?
let us
Madam
also
Justice,
find out-
actually, that is
no, no, no,
that's
let's
what,
answer
okay,
the question.
Absolutely. Let me
Let's
actually
answer the question.
because you're
when the
responsible.
politician steals the money,
Yes.
where does it
Madam
go?
Justice, actually your
How
institution
many
is
beds-
charged.
How many
your
beds
institution-
does this politician sleep in?
Very true.
How many people does this politician bury?
Yes,
And
Madam.
where are all these people in the family of the politician,
Yes.
or they are in the community which
Okay,
votes him
Madam
into power?
Justice,
I
IGG
think let us understand
Very good.
that this corruption is about the sharing of resources.
Okay, and answer me on this. Your
sharing of
institution
resources
is charged with the responsibility of eliminating corruption. That is the
Exactly.
mandate given, abuse of authority and of public office, and your powers are really constitutionally enshrined, entrenched, and people are rotting in jails. You're seeing them, patients are dying in hospitals. You're seeing the poor losing land, and the rich literally automatically becoming landlords of sub-county land. But we're asking ourselves, okay, you're making this complaint that it's not the politician, yet you're supposed to deal with the corruption of the political elites, of the people who are custodians of society resources. What has IGG, what have you done to ensure that actually you curb this? Because your responsibility
I
is not...
I am actually saying that the Inspectorate of Government does as much as it does, as it can do, within the resources that are allocated to the Inspectorate of Government. The Inspectorate of Government is given, what is the budget of Uganda today? 16 trillion.
No, 18.
It?
It's
18 trillion.
Yes.
Do you know the budget of the Inspectorate of Government? In 1 year? You don't. It's 45 billion. Now, that 45 billion is you're expecting people, a group of 400 people. That is the staff of the Inspectorate of Government. 400 people to fight corruption in a budget of 18 trillion. Is that even feasible at all? But let's go back to these politicians. Who supports these politicians in power? Who puts them in power? Aren't we the ones who do so? Why don't we lynch them like the chicken thief? We don't lynch them. The chicken thief steals his chicken, takes it to his family, cooks it and eats it in his home. This politician who you say is the most corrupt, and by the way, I don't want to agree with you that most of the money is taken by politicians, because I know that most of the money is not taken by politicians.
I'm bringing you cases along the way this discussion, just for the time that
most of the money is taken.
Ma'am,
the loss of these funds. The loss of these funds.
Ministers
the
in
loss
government,
of these funds is facilitated by public servants.
You see, ma'am,
it is not facilitated
there are
by
politicians
ministers
in this country that are protected with 3 patrol cars, with almost 9 patrol men, with guns, just giving them security protection on the road, and all that expense is from the state. Why? Because actually people do not like those politicians, and so they're supposed to be buttressed to make sure that they protect them from the anger of the people. So you cannot be arguing against it, because the people have been disempowered. The political entrenchment, people came into power here.
I don't think that is the reason for the corruption that we have.
When the person who is hated is being protected by patrol cars, is protected by soldiers, and on the road,
are public servants.
Not as
like
many.
Me.
If someone is not hated, yes,
like
but
me.
it's only one policeman, actually, the police security guard who have seen.
Maybe Bolden's...
Okay, so Patrick,
I want us to agree.
Yes,
I want us to agree.
Just to move on, ma'am, you see, the Danish Anti-Corruption Code of Conduct states this, that we will avoid any corrupt, real or potential between our personal interests and those of the state. We will not give or receive any bribe in any form. Rwanda itself, the anti-corruption statement policy is that we need to have effective political leadership in the fight against corruption, increased public demand for accountability and rejection of corruption. So we are having the understanding that if you do not punish the corrupt, you're actually going to perpetuate corruption. So should we have a different approach, that instead of fighting corruption, let's fight the corrupt?
You see, look at how corruption is being fought. In fact, sometimes I feel sorry with
actually, you
because
feel
the whole thing is that you are dealing with a lot of invisibility.
Exactly.
We are dealing with a lot of shadows. Now, that's why I'm raising issues of values, norms, and behavior. You see, somebody's heart is already conceived or having a certain way. They have already planned how to do something. They already know the law, how to beat that law. Now, the question is, that's why I was saying, looking at the whole impact, because you are taking money which are meant to buy drugs, right? Now, it means inside your heart, you do not bother about the life to be saved by those drugs. You do not bother about what's going to happen to the money for the roads. Now, the question is, if we are talking about Ugandans being patriotic, what are we talking about? Now, the same people who are advocating for national values, they are the same people who are involved in taking a lot of money. In fact, I'm finding it very difficult, somebody who has taken billions of money, to say it is corruption. That is real theft. Stealing.
Exactly, that's what
yes.
we're talking about.
So
and I'm going to bring cases.
When you look at some of these notions of norms, values, and all that, we're trying to put people in the front line. That, by the way, you have the power, according to Article 1 of the Constitution. Now, how are you utilizing that power? That if you are using your power to condone, accept, celebrate, then there's a problem.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, you have civil servants. I'll give you an example. Last year, there was a group which wanted the money through Youth Livelihood Fund, you know, the women. And the civil servant was very clear. I will give you 3 million, but you will take 2. Now, there was a lot of debate in the group. Do we take it or we refuse it? But at the end of the day, because they needed money, they went and picked 2 and signed for 3. Now, what does it mean? Whom are you blaming at this level?
Yes.
Is it the civil servant? Now, the civil servant, any leader,
I think they are all the same.
Okay, let's
put they are all the same.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Let's put a pause on this, and when we come back, we deal with the issue of how now we can influence the next generation, because definitely we're going to go around over this. And the aspect of asking ourselves that, do we now need the public to come in a more pragmatic
and
way?
Of course, you have to talk
and
about
thanks
the
our viewers
private
for keeping
sector.
with us. Let me go for a break, and then we'll come back and conclude over this passionate discussion. And thanks our viewers for keeping with us. I'm Karaga Bodwins, and we're discussing the phenomenon or the stench of corruption in our country. And on that same question, on how should we deal with corruption in this nation, on Facebook, Patrick Serunjoji says that that leadership issue which creates greed and selfishness, I think the time for this generation to hand over is here. They can't fight corruption, it will be the next generation. We all know all the guys in corruption scandals are ministers and prime ministers. How do you expect them to fight this? The answer is simple: vote out the current government and replace them with a new breed. And lastly, by the government putting the law of property for sale. Okay, I think that one we had noted it. Just one comment from Twitter. Unless corruption is dealt with from the top to the bottom, it won't be eradicated. Top corrupt officials must be severely punished without leniency, IGIB agenda, their mamas, and so on. Thanks for your contributions online. And you can hear the sentiment on the other side that actually is completely contradictory with what the two of us here have agreed on.
You know what?
Let me give you just a prominent constitutional case that actually was entangled with IGG office. Hopefully you remember it. The constitutional petition number 46 after 2011, after the Kololo Anti-Corruption Court, judged that Sam Kutesa, John Nasasira, and Mwesigwa Rukutana, all ministers at that time, were jointly charged, and they had been found guilty by the IGG with the offences of abuse of office
let me correct
and
you.
causing financial
Let me
loss.
first correct
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
First of all,
Yes.
the Inspectorate of Government is not a judge.
Okay, but it
So
had,
the Inspectorate of Government cannot find a person guilty. The Inspectorate of Government can find evidence
yes,
which tends to implicate a person.
exactly.
Present it
Now
to
a case
court.
came to
Can I explain?
Because I've not finished. I'm actually understanding your because it's the same explanation that was given by the Constitutional Court. Because these three gentlemen took the IGG to court, saying that you have no powers, you are actually not properly constituted, because by that time it was only the Inspector General that was present. The other deputies weren't there. They were quashing the very agency that had been put there to fight corruption, meaning that there is a sickness within the government itself that people understand. They put an agency which is just a barking dog, can't bite, like the IGG, and so we're asking ourselves, how do we redeem ourselves from this problem? How do you help the next generation, especially because that is, for me, the concern. We believe, based on the evidence presented, that most of the monies that are lost and the resources misused in Uganda are by people who are in power and old people. So how do we influence the next generation to make sure that we don't get
I want to thank you very much for you giving me this opportunity, actually. Because now you've given me the opportunity, which I have been dying to have, to explain how syndicated corruption happens. Syndicated corruption is corruption which is carried out by groups of people. That is where we lose most money in the public sector. And it is usually through procurement. Now, when you have a procurement, I can assure you, you will never have a case in which billions of shillings are stolen from government where the private sector is not involved. And I can assure you, this private sector is not only made up of old men. Actually, when you look at the private sector and the people who are getting convicted now for stealing billions of shillings, millions of dollars from government, most of them are young men like you. They work together with people in government. They work together with the politicians. They get contracts.
And you don't think that they are victims of patronage?
I don't want to think that they are ignorant of what they are doing. They are very well intentioned, very well placed. They work together with public servants. They work together with politicians. They get these contracts. They get the money out of government as procurements of works, goods, services to the public. Then the money is siphoned out of the public sector and taken into the private sector. Then it is shared between those young men and the old men who you are calling politicians. Some of them actually young men who are also politicians. They share it between those three. The person in the private sector, who is actually the conduit, and I believe who gets the bigger amount of money. Then the one in the public sector who gets the peanuts, and then the politician. So I don't want us to perpetrate this lie of saying that actually it is the politicians who are stealing.
Okay, so let's
the
get
politicians are just facilitated by people in the private sector and the public sector. We can go around
this. So let's get a solution perhaps as we are wrapping up, Patrick, because we need to understand what should now the public do. In 2016, the government spent at least 10 billion shillings on medical treatment for its officials abroad, okay? Meaning that you have about 2.8 million for just about 140 people who are going out to be treated on public taxed money. Kutesa, who served as president of the UN General Assembly recently, was actually alleged by a convicted Chinese in the US called Patrick Ho Chi Ping, who was convicted for bribing leaders in Chad and Uganda to simply have access to government bids. And nothing is done about him. So if we feel impotent that actually the IGG cannot do its work, if the government itself is not politically willing to deal with, what should people do?
I think from the explanation by the Honorable Justice and from the cases of Kutesa, Agenda, and so many, of course, it tells you something. An acceptable practice, acceptable behavior. That's why when we went into studying, we said, okay, corruption already within the society, it has been taken as a normal thing. It is part of that value base. It's a practice, it's a behavior, it's accepted. Now, look, private sector.
What should we do now, Patrick?
Now, I'm now talking about exposing. There are a number of cases where community members have come to play a role. And that's why, for me, I'm going back to the community. That we have not seen, for instance, people in spite of all this evidence, the IGG can fight this high-level corruption. But when a politician gets that money, information is everywhere. But where do they go? They are walking on the streets of Kampala. They are walking in the streets of Rukunjiri. They are walking on the streets of
okay, Patrick, so just very clearly, what can an ordinary citizen do?
We are looking at
listen,
yes.
What can an ordinary citizen do to Sam Kutesa?
We are looking at the isolating, despising, shaming, because their facts are there. But of course, we need to look at it. That's why we are trying to explain to the public to understand that this issue, this big elephant of corruption, cannot be fought by IGG alone, cannot be fought by the high levels. I gave you an example. One of the ministers was arrested. What happened? People came to demonstrate. They went to petition the president, release our man. Now, what does it mean? That if we cannot put our acts together as a society, it means we have basically accepted everything the way it is.
So how do we put our act together? Just 1 minute,
now,
Patrick, because I need to have a concise response on what you think as a civil society.
First of all,
people should do, because we seem to be disempowered and emasculated by the powers of the corruption bidders and practitioners. The people who are perpetrating this particular problem are so powerful, and it seems we cannot...
it's not true, because these people also come begging during elections. They even buy voters in order to get the authority. The question is, if somebody can come begging in front of you, give me a vote, how come after voting you become so weak? How come, I mean, we really need to go into this debate. Who has the power? Now, if we have given you 5-year term, you have come with very clear issues to put on the table. You are going to fight corruption, you are going to do this, you are going to do this. You have not done it. Corruption has increased. Now, how do you come again to claim that you are more powerful than the vote when you are begging for votes? So that's why we are saying, let the people realize the power they have. They have the power even to excommunicate, to isolate, in fact, even to dismiss. Now, if the opportunity comes during the elections, what is the debate? And you see, we have to go back that if, for instance, look at the trillions of money that is lost. When somebody goes to a health facility and you don't get medication, think about where that money went. Because a mother who is dying was not meant to die. The ambulance was supposed to have fuel, but instead it doesn't have fuel. So I think the more people realize that they are the losers, the higher they will start realizing that indeed they have the power. Even what you are calling a politician who is very powerful, look, they are just having this power because people voted for them. Just imagine if they are voted out of office. Look, in the last parliament, for instance, 67% of the MPs did not come back. But you see, well, why are they also waiting for the elections? We are also talking about when they come back to their constituencies, when the leaders, because we are also talking about at the district, at the sub-counties, at all levels. Can we expose? Can we shame these people? Can we isolate them in the churches? When they come, why do we give audience? Why do we treat them as celebrities?
Yeah,
you know, yes, at the end of the day, we need to realize that the power lies with the people. Yes. We are misusing the same power that we have.
Isolate
technically, even all this process of, you know, the Local Government Act is very clear, the Constitution is very clear. It provides for all these issues, including freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, all of these. But how do people exercising them?
Okay, good point to Enon, and let me get Honorable Justice to wrap up on this. He's insisting, I think we need to do ostracization and just distance ourselves from these people. Hopefully it is possible. Moral uprightness, can that be the answer to this? Does even moral uprightness apply in Uganda here? Just a positive spin on the future of fighting corruption and perhaps whether we can have this.
I want to say one thing about the fight against corruption. Fighting corruption is done in a particular context. You cited to us Denmark. Which other country did you cite?
Rwanda.
And you cited Rwanda. I
Yes.
don't want to
China,
talk about
China
Rwanda.
actually does extrajudicial executions.
And
of
is it
people
any less corrupt?
But it's
You see, for us, we sit in institutions. We sit in institutions and then we sit in associations where we talk with other people who fight corruption in their countries. When you're fighting corruption in the underdeveloped world, it is the same animal. Move from Uganda, go to Tanzania, go to Malawi, go to Zambia, it is exactly the same animal. And the causes and why it is not exterminated are the same. Limited resources that have to be shared among many, ignorance and vulnerability. Then we also have what you are calling moral decadence. But moral decadence is really the lived reality of the people in a particular region. And I want to say that we have not been successful in fighting corruption, or we have had only limited successes. We retreat and surrender and go back and start fighting again and then run away again and start fighting again. The reason is the environment in which we are fighting the corruption.
So the environment needs to be changed.
The environment
How do we change that?
needs
Just
to
as we're
change.
ending up to make an
We
optimistic...
need to have, we need to have, first of all, the issues of governance have to be dealt with, both at the level of the political and the economic. You cannot think that, I have heard many people on the forums are saying if we deal with the politics, then we will be happy, we will have no more corrupt people. But what is the economy like? What kind of economies do we have? Why are our economies the way that they are? Those economies are the ones that predispose us to the corruption that we are fighting here. And it is not in Uganda only. If you look at the region south of the Sahara, apart maybe from South Africa, the same animal, the way it manifests here is the way it manifests in all those other countries. So the solution must be the same for all of us. Unless we reach the levels of development that the Norwegians, the Danish that you are talking about here have reached. I don't want to talk about Rwanda.
You know, that is very
and I
ironic.
Think I don't want to talk about Rwanda because I don't know what is inside Rwanda. And I don't want
Transparency International did the same study in Rwanda, just as equally with Kenya.
Those results of Transparency International.
Is 144th, Tanzania is 99th.
Those levels of Transparency International are also sometimes peppered with the politics in the region.
Really?
Yes, they are.
So if Uganda had been wrong, so what would make Uganda to be wrong? Just 1 minute, because
but also, it's because we can't talk about Rwanda on the screen. But between you and I,
yes, we know the difference.
Let us talk about Rwanda.
Yes,
not on the screen.
Okay, ma'am.
Considering who we know, we have relatives and friends and what have you, and we talk about it.
Honorable Justice Irene Mulyagonja, the Uganda Inspector General of Government, IGG, and Mr. Muzinduki, Patrick, Head of Governance Policy and Advocacy, KRC. You've been profoundly magnificent in this impassioned discussion, in as much as it's wide and we can't really exhaust it. But thank you so much for your contribution. Ma'am, I look forward to seeing you again here. And same with Patrick.
Thank you for inviting us.
And thanks to all our viewers and for everyone who has participated on our social media platforms and Karaga Boardrooms. And if you are out there as a government agency or an NGO or an MDA, please come talk to us if you want to have a discussion that is customized to the general public interest, but more centered to your own particular preference. Come talk to us, talk to our general manager, myself, or our sales team, and we'll do a profoundly great job. Have a great night. God bless.
NTV, turning on your world.